Right. The statue of Nelson atop the column is 18 feet tall and faces the Houses of Parliament. The panels at the bottom of the column depict some of the most famous events in Nelson's life. The Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Don't know. The Battle of the Nile, where he fought the French. Or is that the one where he said, I see no signal? I can't remember. The Battle of Copenhagen, where I think we bombarded Copenhagen. And that was in... Was that the 1790s? It wasn't the 19th century one, because that's after Trafalgar. The Napoleonic War one. Because... Or maybe they both... Well, they both were Napoleonic Wars. But there was a later one where the Russians and the French had signed a peace treaty where the Russians said the French could have the Danish fleet. And so to stop them doing that, the British went so that the French couldn't get their ships back, couldn't replace the ships they'd lost at Trafalgar. And so we went and basically demanded it, and because it was so important from a war perspective to make sure that the French didn't get the ships, we bombarded Copenhagen and the civilians. And we took all of the Navy ships. And then a year later, the Danish government sent a yacht that had been given by the British royal family to, I think, the Danish royal family, and they sent a message with it saying, you forgot one. Which is... I shouldn't be laughing about kind of how horrible the whole thing was. Absolutely dreadful. It wasn't even this Battle of Copenhagen. It was absolutely dreadful. But I just love the fact that Denmark's like, you forgot this extra one. Here is another one. The column was built in 1843 after he died, which was 1800s, 180 something, and cost £47,000, which is $3 million in modern currency. I assume it was meant to be built in 1840 for 30,000, government expenditure. The lines at the base of the column were commissioned in 1858 and sculptured by Sir Edwin Landseer. It was an odd choice. Landseer was a highly acclaimed painter, a favourite of Queen Victoria, but he had never once sculpted anything in his life. The lions were unveiled in 1867 to moderate praise, although some critics believed the sculptures looked more like sphinxes than lions. St Mary le Strand. That's Martin in the Fields, I think. In 1710, Queen Anne urged Parliament to pass an act allowing for the construction of 50 new churches in London. The act was passed, but building 50 churches is easier said than done. Build 50 churches. Yeah, okay. That seems sensible. Only 12 of what were called Queen Anne's churches were ever built. The first Queen Anne church was St Mary le Strand, on the former site of the largest maypole in London. A rise in Puritanism in the 1660s... No, it would have been later in the 1600s. It would have been it would have been earlier in the 1660s, probably under Cromwell. You muppets. Under 1660s, that was the glory. That was the Restoration. Puritanism kind of went out of fashion when Charles II came back. A rise in Puritanism in the 17th century, because at least that's accurate, because I don't remember the exact date, meant that many of the city's maypoles were torn down by religious extremists due to their heathen origins. But this maypole fell over from a high wind in 1672. Why not just put that? At least that's accurate, as far as I'm aware. It probably isn't. It probably just got knocked over because a cart hit it in 1675. Knowing the accuracy of some of these things. Mary, Queen of Scots, ruling in England. I can't get over that. In its original plan, St Mary's featured a 250-foot column to honour Queen Anne. A statue of the Queen was to sit atop the column, but I think the actual Queen should have sat on top of it. No matter though, the design was approved and materials were required, but the plan was quietly cancelled following Anne's death in August 1714. Makes sense. St Pancras! The station, named after the patron saint of children, St Pancras, St Pancras Station was built by the Midland Railway Company on a disreputable slum. Not to be confused with those reputable slums you hear so much about. Landlords were happy to sell their property for a pretty penny, and inhabitants of the neighbourhood were driven out of their homes without compensation. Still happens. Building the station required moving a church and excavating its graveyard, disturbing many people from their eternal rest. Lovely. Yes. The Midland Railway Company held a contest in 1865, as St Pancras was being built, to find the best design for a hotel the company intended to attach to the station. The winner was the architect Sir George Gilbert Scott, despite, or perhaps because, his submission was greater and more expensive than the specifications the MRC called for. Why is that name familiar? I think he's done. I think he did a lot of designing. I'm trying to place him. Did he design? He might have designed the Anglican Cathedral in Liverpool. That might be where I'm getting his name from. I can't remember. The first train to leave St Pancras in 1868 was bound for Manchester and did not stop until it reached Leicester, 97 miles away. At the time, it was the longest continual train run in the world. I bet it never stopped there again. Trafalgar Square, formerly the site of the monarchy's stables and carriage house, Trafalgar Square was designed by the architect John Nash as an open space for the public. The square was improved upon over the course of the 19th century, with fountains and statues giving the originally modest square some embellishment. The whole of Trafalgar Square is a monument to one of the most storied and legendary conflicts in British history, the Battle of Trafalgar, where the British Navy, led by Admiral Horatio Nelson, defended the nation from Napoleon Bonaparte's naval advances 1805. I knew it was around then. We beat the French. Also, the Spanish were involved. We should probably remember this. They were allied to the French at the time. Admiral Nelson was mortally wounded during the conflict and died 3 hours later. But that's fine, because he won, he beat the French, we beat the French. Defeat in battle was not enough permanently to drive Napoleon away from England, however. Instead, he turned his focus to weaker enemy nations, and his victories over them allowed his empire to grow. We still beat him, granted. I had a baguette yesterday, so maybe it's time to move on. So, Napoleon still planned to invade England. So, for example, that's why he sold... why the Louisiana Purchase happened. He sold Louisiana to America, and the price was so high they had to borrow money from the Bank of England, which kind of tickles me. And if Napoleon had won, he could just take the debt and be like, "Yeah, we sold. we want the money again." I don't know if that would be legitimate. There was one person thinking about fighting the French. There was one man who fought at both Trafalgar and Waterloo, as far as I'm aware, and he was a Spanish fellow by the name of Alvarez. It was like Alvarez, I think, and he was on the Spanish side. He was on one of the Spanish ships fighting against the English. But later on, France turned on Spain. Like, they were marching through to attack Portugal, and they went, actually, we're going to attack Spain while we're here. And so basically conquered Madrid and and kicked everyone out. And Napoleon's older brother became king of Spain. That was King Joseph, I believe. And during the fight, Wellington got made generalissimo of Spain. So he was in control of the English, well, British, I should say, British and Irish, Spanish and Portuguese armies. And attached to him as an aide was Alvarez, who stayed with him after the war ended in 1812, with Napoleon leaving. And then when Napoleon came back for the 100 Days, and fought at Hougoumont and La Raison, which is where the battles actually were, a bit further away from Waterloo. Alvarez was still an aide to Wellington. All right. Westminster, Big Ben. Charles Barry was hired in 1844 to rebuild the Houses of Parliament, which had burned down 10 years earlier. It was decided the new building should include a clock tower, and Barry enlisted the reputable clockmaker Louis Viamy to design, or Vulliamy to design the clock itself. Big Ben is the name colloquially and commonly used for the entire clock tower, but it is the name of the largest. That statement's completely wrong. Big Ben is the name that is commonly used for the entire clock. Okay, that bit's correct. It's wrong. It's not actually the name of the clock tower, but everyone calls it Big Ben. It was originally it is the name for the largest bell in the tower. That last bit's just wrong. It was first called St. Stephen's Tower because Parliament used to meet in St. Stephen's Hall. So, St. Stephen's Tower. Then it became known as... Then the official name became the Clock Tower because it's a clock tower. And then, in the Jubilee, so it was Queen Elizabeth's 50th year, it became called the Elizabeth Tower after her. That is the reason, you pillock. I should stop reading this, it's just making me angry. The origin of the nickname Big Ben has been boiled down to two theories. The first is that it derives from Sir Benjamin Hall, the portly Commissioner of Works, which is, I think, the one that I've heard. The other theory is that the nickname comes from the world of boxing. Heavyweight fighters of the time were sometimes called Big Bens, after the heavyweight boxing champion Benjamin Comte. Each clock dial is engraved at its base. The engraving reads in Latin, "O Lord, keep safe our Queen Victoria the First." I think I prefer the first one, but that's just me. The Houses of Parliament, also known as the Palace of Westminster, already mentioned that. The Houses of Parliament were built and remodelled around one of the first royal residences. The Great Hall inside Parliament is the last remnant of the palace built by William II at the end of the 11th century. The old palace remained a royal residence for just over 400 years until Henry VIII moved to Whitehall Palace in 1530. The old palace became the permanent location of the country's two Houses of Parliament, the House of Commons and the House of Lords. To call Henry VIII's relationship with the Roman Catholic Church turbulent would be an understatement. It's like saying that in 1940s Britain's relationship with Germany was a little bit fraught. The conflict with the church put the king's lawyers hard at work, and they situated themselves at the Old Palace, making the building the home of the courts of law as well. Two of the most notable people to be tried in the Palace of Westminster are Guy Fawkes, the Catholic extremist who attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1606, and King Charles I, who was tried and executed for treason at the height of the English Civil War. Prime Minister Spencer Perceval, the only Prime Minister to have ever been assassinated, was assassinated in the lobby of the House of Commons in 1812. Charles I wasn't actually executed in the Houses of Parliament. It is actually used. You can actually be arrested in there, in theory, for contempt of Parliament, and you can be. They have a jail to put you in. King Charles I, when he was being executed, wore two coats. For he feared that as it was a cold morning, and if he were to shiver with cold, people would think it would be fright. Right. Whitechapel, Spitalfields Market. Spitalfields, an old neighbourhood in London's East End, took its name from the hospital that was built there in 1197, St Mary's Spital. And by spital, they didn't mean there was a saint called Mary who liked to spit when she talked. The word is an abbreviation of hospital. I mean, yes. Yes, that makes sense. And was generally used to mean hospitality in Middle English, which is the very opposite of spitting in someone's face. Some of these things, some of the little sides they put in like that are funny. Some are just stupid. That was a stupid one. As Spitalfields became less of a field and more of a developed neighbourhood in the late 17th century, a silk thrower named John Balk acquired the rights to hold a market in the area every Thursday and Saturday. The market, which sold only fruits and vegetables, was a quick success. Spitalfields, like most of the East End, was populated by immigrants to England, and shortly after the market opened, London experienced a wave of incoming French Huguenots, who had just been expelled from France for being Protestant. It seems weird that they're all kind of like, or for their religious beliefs, yeah, the English don't like Catholics. It's like, well, the French got thrown out. No, actually, I don't. If memory serves, the Huguenots weren't actually expelled from France for being Protestant. They were being killed, murdered. They were being executed. They were being murdered or executed for being Protestant. So they escaped. Many of the French Huguenots. Is that the case? I think so. Who settled in Spitalfields were skilled silk weavers. I think a lot of them were middle class, and sold their wares at the Spitalfield market. It wasn't long before the market became synonymous with its luxurious silk, and all of Spitalfields gained a very positive reputation as a result. A reputable slum. In 1875, the market's lease passed to a developer named Robert Horner. Horner fought regularly with the Whitechapel District Board of Works over how the market could be expanded without disturbing traffic around the market. An iron and glass roof was built in 1883, and the surrounding shops were built over the next century. Spitalfields, and the East End in general, fell in esteem as time went on. By the 19th century, the silk makers had long moved on, and overpopulation and poverty led to a rise in crime. The market remained an important fixture, providing the food needed to get through the day to those who could afford it. It's still there today, though in recent years it's fallen to corporate chains and to stalls that think charging 200 quid for a pillow with a cat drawn on it by an art student is good business. Oh, and if you're a Ripper fan, it's directly opposite the 10 Bells pub, where various of Jack's victims enjoyed a quiet pamp while they still could raise a glass to them sometime. That should have an ellipsis, that should be a full stop. Alright, St Mary Matfelon. I'm really confused. Oh, right. The original Whitechapel that gave the borough its name was built on this site in 1286. It would be rebuilt 3 times over the course of its history. The first was in 1329, when it was officially named St Mary Matfelon. It was then rebuilt in 1685, despite the fact it was one of only a few buildings to survive the Great Fire of 1666, and it was rebuilt again in 1875 in order to more closely resemble the church as it was in 1329. Talk about indecisive. The man who executed King Charles I at the end of the English Civil War, Richard Brandon, was buried in St Mary's churchyard. Historical records document a scandal that took place in the church around 1710. A scandal in church, whatever. No. Anyway, it seems like the rector of the church set up an altarpiece depicting the Last Supper and had the figure of Judas made to look exactly like a personal enemy of his, the Dean of Peterborough. As far as passive-aggressive goes, I'd say that's pretty aggressive. I mean, that's not even a rare thing. I mean, it's basically most of Dante's Inferno. Hey, this guy I really don't like. Oh, your parents are in hell. How did that happen? So Mary Matfelon was hit hard during the Blitz of World War II and was eventually demolished in 1952. Okay, I read these. Oh, because I didn't actually enter it. Right, there we go. We've done a lot of reading. I don't think there's much to do. There's the groups of people. And there's things in present day, which is... I'm not sure how impressive that will be. I think I'm actually going to just stop there. So I've just done a session just of database readings, but we won't have to do that for a while until we get a load more, if there are. But I think we will, as I said, I think we'll put the cut there. We've done all of those. Hooray, hooray, hooray. And next time we'll actually do submissions. Not sure how I'm going to cut this up. It might actually be 3 videos. We'll find out. Thanks for watching, everyone. Thanks for watching.